Dear viewers, welcome to the Stockfest channel interview, which accompanies our special program, Distribution and Profile, in our festival section, Dockfest Education. Today, I'm talking with Wouter Jansen, head of Square Eyes Distribution in Vienna. Dear Wouter, a very warm welcome to you again too. And thank you for making the time for this interview today. Would you be so kind to introduce yourself and maybe say some words about the Square Eyes distributions too?
Yeah, of course. So, hi everybody, I'm Wouter Jansen. I run Square Eyes, which is a distribution company which is now based in Austria, in Vienna. I've been running this company for around 10 years by now. I started it in 2011. At that point, I was working as a programmer at a short film festival called Go Short, where I worked for 10 years. And through my experience there, I kind of noticed that some filmmakers were having trouble getting their films out into the world. So I would see films in the Netherlands, which I would love, but then I would never see them internationally at festivals. So that's kind of where my idea started to start this distribution. Back then, it was called Some Shorts. I started working mainly with Dutch student films. A bunch of those have also been in Castledockfest in the past. And over the years, my company grew. I started doing more international titles. I slowly started doing feature titles as well. Then last year in 2020, I changed the name of my company to Square Eyes. So it's in a way the same company, but now I have a bit more of a clear focus with the feature films that I'm working with. So I launched that company in 2020, which wasn't the best time to start a company also focused on sales, January 2020. And then I work with like a handful of features every year, 4 to 6, and around 10 to 15 short films. And all of them come from all over the world.
Thank you, Wouter, for this very brief, but also very interesting summary of how Square Eyes was born and what you did up front. Of course, we want to talk about the specific profile of your distribution today, and also line out several other points that I'm very curious about. But first, you've already said it actually now, but I'm very interested to know what motivated you to found a distribution. Could you say something about that?
Yeah. Yes. So it's really this experience that I just saw that films weren't traveling, or that filmmakers maybe weren't putting in the time, or producers to do this. While I had the feeling that those films actually had were strong enough to travel. And with the first director I started working with, this was Sharif Korver with his film No Way Back. I really noticed that he kind of had that ambition to travel internationally with his film and show his film also outside of the country. So I started it with my experience of just noticing that filmmakers weren't doing it. But then I think now it's much more that I see the value of for a filmmaker to have their film screen internationally and what that can do for their career. That kind of keeps me focused, keeps me doing this job, and that I see where the value is. And I think over the years, a lot has changed. So when I started doing this, I was sitting at my kitchen table together with Sharif, and we were writing envelopes, burning DVDs, checking if the film was burned correctly on that DVD, writing forms to submit to the festivals. And now I'm just sitting behind my laptop and I click 2 times a button and a film is submitted. So it has become much easier now over the years to do this work. So back then it was just much more labor intensive, but I think now it's just more difficult to navigate because there's also just much more festivals popping up everywhere. Yeah.
Okay, so the intention was born by the fact that you were already doing curational work in the festival. in some shorts festival, or was this the first name of your distribution?
First name, yes, but it
Go
was
Shorts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, they were very similar. Okay, so you were working at Go Shorts, so you were in close touch with films anyway,
Yeah.
and through your work, you figured that it might be more difficult or more easy for some films. To travel, like you said. So was it easy for you to found the distribution then and to jump into the market?
Yes and no. So like what you just explained, like I did have the connections already. I did have access to these films in the early stage. So I would see films, for instance, with Film Academy at the graduation day, because I would be scouting there, or I would see films that got submitted to our festival that were brand new. So in that way, it was easy that I had access to these filmmakers. People already knew me after a while in my position. So that made it easy. But then again, like there's not really a market. I mean, there is a market for short films, but nobody has like loads of money for this. So in that way, it's not easy starting a company. I was recently talking to somebody about it who was asking how you can start a company like this. For me, I was able to start a company like this because I had a full-time job. So because I was working at the festival, I was able to do this because I didn't need to earn income through the distribution. So I was never losing money or anything, but in the beginning I wouldn't be able to live from this company. So the fact that I had this stable position at a film festival gave me access to these films and gave me the stability that I could do this work. But that also meant that on top of a quite busy job, I was doing another quite busy job. So the first years of the company, I definitely was working like too many hours a week. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So now you said several things about your working routine, about the history of how it is to found a distribution. So I think actually I wanted to work my way there, but it might be very important to first line out the profile of your distribution.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that you started with short films, and you also said that by now you are also focusing on some feature films every year. So could you tell us something about the profile of your distribution of Square Eyes?
Yeah. So I think the most important in all of this is just that I have a festival background, and now my new colleague who just joined the company, Sanne, is also working for a film festival. So with our line of films, I think we always keep in mind our own taste, and that's mostly motivated by our experience as programmers and those types of films that we gravitate to. So with the short films, in a way, it's super diverse. So if you would look at the films that I'm working with that are playing at Dockfest this year, they're really diverse. It can be super experimental. It can be somewhat more classical documentary. But in the end, the bottom line for us is mainly, do we think this festival could work in festivals? Could we help this director out, and do we see potential for that? Or is it maybe a more difficult film, and do we think that we can kind of contribute to this, although we know that it won't be like a massive success in all festivals, but that we do think that we can help out in this. So the hard criteria is the film has to be under 30 minutes for the shorts, but besides that, it just has to resonate with us. And I have a team of friends that are watching films when I'm not completely certain. So I also have always have a couple of people kind of giving their opinions about the films. And then with the features, I think that was more difficult to kind of come to what I wanted to do, because in the beginning I was working with films of directors that I had worked with. So the first features I came on board with were the feature products from Guido Hendricks, Stranger in Paradise, with whom I had worked with 2 of his short films before. The first feature from Reberdowski, Radio Kobani, which also played at the Dockfest, if I'm not mistaken, with whom I had worked with his short films before. So it was more like I kind of fell into these projects, and luckily a lot of them were like really strong projects. But I didn't really have like a clear curatorial line. And so before I renamed my company, I was really kind of searching for this, like, okay, what is the type of films that I want to work with? And in the end, I just realized that a lot of the films that I always liked seeing at festivals often didn't have sales representation. In the beginning, I didn't really have a clear curatorial line with the features. And this is what I was looking into in the past years, what kind of profile I wanted to have. And then I noticed that a lot of the feature films that I would see in festivals that were successful in festivals, but that I also liked, often didn't have sales representations because they were too difficult, sometimes too outspoken, in cases close to more like artist moving image. But that for my feeling, they were still quite narrative. So I for my taste, I thought like these are accessible films, but then you notice that for the market, like an indie film is something different than for festivals. So now with Square Eyes, I really try to focus on these films. So films that are more outspoken or in their aesthetic approach or in their approach to narrative. In cases it is filmmakers that have been working more in the experimental field before, but they still have like a clear lean to narrative. So I think that Feast that's playing at the Dockfest is like almost like a perfect example of it. A film that is quite a difficult film, but for me, it's like really a super outspoken film. How Tim approached it, the narrative is really clear, but then still everything around it is really pushing the form a bit. And like I'm super happy with this choice. I think it's also really a place in the market, if you want to say it like that. But I also realized that there's a reason that there's this place in the market, because these films are just super difficult to find distribution for. Often you notice that people like the films, but that they just know that they are too difficult for an audience. So it's with the features, in a way, it's similar to the shorts, so that it's films that I know that will play well in festivals. But I think our profile is a bit more specific, while with the shorts, we can take a somewhat more classical narrative film. And with the features, I just know that the competition of other agents is too big, and that I'm much more focused in that place. Yeah.
Okay, so in a way, you give a home to films that others are scared of, maybe. Maybe also because they might think that they are too professionalized already. Before I ask my next questions concerning everything you already or just said, I just want to mention that you have already had a wide range of your distributions collection played at Castledockfest over the years. To mention some of them, I've got Escort by Guido Hendricks in 2014, who already also won the Golden Key. You've got If Mama Ain't Happy, Nobody Is Happy from Mia de Jong in 2015, or just as another example, because there are really a lot of films that you brought into our festival. So you are part of Castledockfest for several years already, what we really appreciate. Another film would be 9 Days from My Window in Aleppo, and Sundog in 2022, what will now be replayed in the Profile program, what I will mention again later. And you also have a strong selection in the regular program of this year's festival. So you already mentioned that some films, so one concern of the selection of your distribution square eyes is that these should be festival films. They should be aesthetically strong and still have a narrative that can be found, to say so. So what do you think is the benefit for films to be in a distribution in general and also to be in your distribution then?
Yeah. So I think in general, like having it, you don't need a distributor for short films for sure. Like it's quite democratic how the world of festivals work. You can just submit your film, people will watch it. So in the end, if I look at my approach to, for instance, submitting to your festival, it just comes down to that I'm sending the film. So I'm not doing that much different than a filmmaker would do. But it's, so the biggest advantage is that I'm doing that job for you, that you don't have to do it. So you don't have to think of these deadlines that are coming up. You don't have to do that work. You don't have to follow up with screening prints and everything. That's all taken care of. And then now what I mentioned earlier is that there's now so many festivals nowadays that having a distributor can help you kind of cut through the noise a bit and find out like, oh, actually, these are the interesting festivals. These are festivals where you would pay like loads of money, but what do you get in return? Is it worth that? So that you are a bit more smart with the decisions that you make. So I think that's what people usually call like festival strategy. That you have somebody taking care of that together with you, making those choices. And then I think being part of a good distribution also can help as a sort of quality stamp. So if it's a distribution where people know like, okay, they don't work with a lot of films, the films that they work with are high quality, then it works in a similar way as a good festival selection would work. That if a programmer looks at your film and sees like, oh, they're part of this distribution, that must mean that it's an interesting film. But I'm also aware of that there's kind of a issue with this is the fact that films in my catalog are in competition with films in my catalog. That a festival often won't take more than, let's say they like 10 of my films, they won't select 10 of my films, even though the films are from all over the world. So normally you're more in competition with films with a similar theme, with films from the same country, maybe from the same school. And then in my case, it's also films in the same portfolio. So this is also why I'm quite critical of the films that I work with, is that I know like, okay, they have to be as strong as all the other titles in their in my portfolio, because otherwise they kind of suffer under stronger films that are in there in a way. But yeah, so I think like doing this work is mainly the thing. With the features, I also do sales. And when it comes to sales, you really need a sales agent on board to do much of them. Like a lot of television buyers, theatrical distributors won't deal with a filmmaker directly. So that means that you actually wouldn't have access to certain platforms without somebody like me. And then with the features, I think also the thing is that it's much more competitive than short films. So where with short films, I'm quite confident that you can send a film and you have just as much chance as any other film sent. With features, you notice that programmers are working like half a year before the festival already selecting titles. So sometimes you know that the deadline isn't even there yet to submit, but you already know that 80% of the festival is set. And that's also what's good about then having a distributor, is that they have a bit more access to these programmers so that the film is on their radar sooner. So it's just this kind of, that I already have a foot in the door, that I have like, I know every year I have so many films. So every year I'm in touch with that festival, instead of as a filmmaker, you might be in touch with a film festival every 2 years. If you start doing features, even less. So it's more difficult to maintain that relation that a sales agent can have for the festival. Yeah.
With your answer, you have on the one hand now already pointed out or summarized kind of your daily work routine, and that it differs for the short forms and the feature forms. And in my opinion, you've already strongly made a point about what could be the benefit, not only in a logistical point of view, but also in what it means to have somebody in the back who is known for a certain profile, for example, just to line that out again. Mm-hmm. And you've already gave a brief summary about in which ways the work you do could be a curatorial work. So to get one point that is also very interesting for us at Castledockfest, because we are a festival that works in a curatorial way. So the festival programmers sit together for weeks and do not only decide what is the most interesting aesthetically or narratively seen film, but they also have certain imaginations about why a film should be seen or screened at a festival. So you already said that festival films are like a major point for your distribution. What do you think is the importance of festivals to the cinematic world, to say so?
Yeah, so like when I'm saying that films, the type of films that I work with are sometimes difficult to get in theaters, means that you won't be able to see those films if it wouldn't be for festivals. So I think that festivals are there to take risks, but also maybe to be able to somewhat show distributors also like, oh, actually there is an audience for this type of film. So in a way, they're really gatekeepers, which is a positive thing and a negative thing in a way. But I really think that festivals can make or break films, but definitely for the types of films that I work with, festivals are just like the main part of the success of those films. Like many of them won't live, like this sounds really negative to say, but like a lot of them will really mainly live in festivals. They won't have like much distribution outside of that. Even the national distribution is sometimes already tricky. So in that way, festivals are just super important. Like I noticed it now. I work with a new feature, an Indian film, Indian French, A Night of Knowing Nothing by Payal Kapadia, which we recently sold to a distributor in the US. And they were actually not planning on releasing the film. They were planning on just doing like special screenings with it and educational screenings. But because we got so much good press during the New York Film Festival and during the Camden Doc Festival, and we even had like IndieWire write about the film and put it in a list of like the top 10 films that distributors have to be on the lookout for to release in cinemas. All of that generated by the festivals. Because of that, the distributor said like, okay, we want to take the chance and also try to do a theatrical run with the film. So there you really see that if the festivals wouldn't have been there, we wouldn't have gotten this theatrical release. And they kind of showed that the press and everybody is really open for this film. And besides that, for short films, definitely, like there's not that much of a commercial world outside. Like Arte buys a handful of films every year, but it's not that many, especially if you look at the amount of films that are out there. So screening in festivals, being able to go there, meeting people, potentially winning awards that can help you out, is one of the things that I think is super valuable for starting filmmakers. So especially with short films, film festivals have a super important role. Yeah.
I think that everything you said is very important. First of all, congratulations to the successes that you have with the work you do with these maybe more often a little bit difficult films that how you say, especially for short films. I think it's very important to be honest about the life they live, and which importance festival do have for the short films. And once again, I try to connect these complexes together, how a distribution and the curatorial work that stands behind the idea of a certain profile is linked to the importance to be brave enough to still show these films. So I think this is, if you leave the idea of a distribution only being a module, a tool for the market, yeah, there might be another thought behind it, and that is about what can be shown where, and once again might maybe also be of importance for you if I hear you talking about your ideas of the distribution.
Yeah, I think the issue is also that it's kind of like a vicious cycle. So I've had discussions with theaters that the types of films that I work with don't get released because there's not an audience for, but there will never be an audience for it if it doesn't get released. So I think like pushing these films out into the market and kind of showing like there is an audience for it. And this is something I think during COVID, everybody had hopes for, because suddenly you saw that more difficult films were doing really well on VOD. So people started hoping like, okay, maybe this will kind of trickle down into theatrical distribution, that people see like, oh, actually, there is an audience for these types of films and we can take a risk with these types of films. But yeah, that's now a bit the question if that actually will happen. But I think like having a strong curation and kind of people understanding like what you're doing can hopefully also change a bit, that people will be taking risks with these films. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So now you mentioned another point, and that is the changes that might have risen or occurred through the pandemic, especially to mention that festivals went online for the first time. A question I had was that your distribution catalog is strongly cinematic, and I wondered, however you are presenting the selection online too. For example, at our festival now, the distribution and profile will not only be screened in the cinema, but also will be available online afterwards. Could you maybe tell me why you decided to do so?
Yeah, I find this a super difficult topic, because like I have the festival background, of course, so I know what the value is in putting these films online. It's just that you reach a much wider audience. You reach people outside of Kassel suddenly, which normally you might not have access to, or would have difficulty traveling, people that might know the festival but never went. But at the same time, I really love the cinema. Like I really want to have people see these films in the cinema. A film like Lembri Udu, which is in the program, that's a film that I think you should see. The same with Sundog, by the way, is really a film that I think you should experience in the cinema. Like you can watch it at home, but it's something different. So it's this, on the one hand, I know that it's just a option to reach more audiences, which I always welcome. And I think it also, in a way, makes the program more democratic with whom you can reach. But it's not what the director has in mind while making this film, and also how I would prefer that people experience it. So it's this kind of, I don't know, like for me, there's not really a right answer in this, but I mainly think that it's just great that more people have the chance to watch these films, especially now when in a lot of countries the numbers are going up again, that you just offer this and don't force people now into closed spaces again if they're not comfortable with it. Yeah.
I can relate to you saying that you highly prefer the cinema as the place to watch the films. So online for you, would you say that this is more like a bridge that you build in these still difficult times, or would you maybe also think that it could be like another way, like one more exit you have to take to bring people also back to the cinema?
Yeah, I think how it started was really that you just, because before online was not a thing, like it was just you would screen in a festival and that was it. And suddenly through the pandemic, all the festivals realized what the potential of this is. So suddenly online throughout the year became a kind of a practice. And now it's the question, like, will we go back to that it's offline only again, or that this will become a part of it? So right now we're still kind of in the middle place where festivals all want to go back to the cinema, usually try it, but with limitations. So then having the online part is still good. And yeah, and then again, like it's good to reach an audience like that. But it's we still kind of have to see, like, if this becomes something to stay at festivals, how that will work out also just in more like financial terms, for instance. And also towards filmmakers, what this will mean, because now suddenly you're expected to be everywhere all the time. So every festival wants you to do an online video, while before it was like, if you're not able to travel, that's it. And so it also becomes much more time consuming for directors without getting this direct feedback from an audience that you would have when you're in the cinema. So with a film like Feast, Tim, the director, Tim Nijendekker, was mainly looking forward to just presenting this film with an audience, to be able to have a dialogue. And that's something that's not really possible when it's online. It's really a one-way street. You maybe can give a explanation, but that's also, again, not the same as having a Q&A where people can actually interact with you. So he was really happy when it suddenly started becoming possible again to travel and actually interact with audiences and discuss the film. Yeah. So in the long run, I think it's really good that we can reach more audiences, but then we have to kind of see how financially that is, that it also supports filmmakers, and how this becomes part of the ecosystem while there's still a focus on actually the cinematic, while prioritizing the cinematic experience at the same time. Yeah.
This is to connect the prioritization of the cinematic experience to our festival. Maybe is that we also start the presentation in the cinema and just make the films available afterwards, so that on the one hand they still have the cinematic premiere, what I think is very important, and also to point out that it is very important to us to make a statement about the cinematic preference still. So we're all figuring out our way into the World Wide Web. How funny is this? So I think we are all like almost one generation of people who more or less grew up with the start of the internet. Do you talk to your filmmakers about if they are okay with the online presentation upfront, or is that something that comes with being in your catalog automatically?
Yeah, before it wasn't a thing. So we would screen at festivals, which was offline, and then at some point we would maybe think about premiering the film online somewhere, and that would then be a discussion. Now I think for a lot of people, it's already kind of automatically that they know this is part of it. I think more in the period where we're really exclusive with a film yet, that it's a bit more of a discussion. But we usually in the beginning, we just say like, okay, this is the reality. How do you feel about this? And what do we do with it? With one of the films, so this Indian film, we, for instance, don't allow it to be online anywhere because it has quite a political dimension. So this was, for instance, one of 3 films, I think, in Toronto Film Festival this year, which was actually not allowed to be online and was only screened in cinema. And so far, we've done that everywhere. So this film is not available anywhere online. We don't put it in video libraries of festivals. It's really, you can see it in the festival itself. So this is really a film that, like, it's not ideal that we have to do it like this. And we've also had to turn festivals down because they weren't able to do just offline screenings. But it's kind of the reality with this project. And it's just something we discussed with the team beforehand. And that's then just what we work with. So it's always a discussion, but I think people are now kind of aware of that. It's just kind of part of the deal. If you want to go to festivals right now, that this is a part of it. And then we just have to make sure that it always happens under the best circumstances. So we had, for instance, that suddenly we saw a film popping up on YouTube because a festival was doing the screenings through YouTube without us knowing. And that's then something that we take the film down because we really want to have it in like proper circumstances when the film is presented. So if we agree to it, then we just have to make sure that it happens in the best type of circumstance. So like what you're doing, that it's just this 2-day window where people can watch it, still also gives people the feeling of a festival. And that it's not like some festivals have just said like, oh, instead of 5 days, we're now 30 days and you can watch it the whole month, which is also kind of not what we agree to when we go to a festival. Like you also need to kind of have that momentum of the festival happening in the buzz instead of just like, oh yeah, just watch it whenever you want over the next month. Yeah.
And that might also link to the audience still experiencing the festival experience, because also if you stay at home, if you can't be on site at the moment or whatever reason there might be, you might get a glimpse of what would happen at the festival with like something that cinema is known for, to have a presentation that is on date, that is scheduled, that you might have to run for. Like what is also why we do the caps. So we have like a maximum capacity for the online audiences. I would now make a break or like try to bring the conversation to another topic for a little. The distribution and profile is part of our DocFest education program, and you've now already spoken about like just in our last block about the online presentation. You have talked us about the profile of the distribution, about how you find your films and what might be required to become part of your catalog. So are there any tips and tricks that you could give to the young filmmakers that might watch our interview now, the ones that are just shortly before finishing university, trying to find the first places for their films at festivals or trying to get into a distribution?
Yeah. So when it comes down to trying to get into a distribution, just get in touch with distributors. Like it's not, sometimes it feels like you need an introduction or something or whatever. It's just, you can just email people. We get a few, around 1 or 2 films a day probably sent to us. We watch them. I mean, we're still critical, so we have to say no a lot, but we do watch all the films. So that's just a starting point. But it's good beforehand that you kind of do your work as well, so that you look at the distributor. If they never work with documentaries and you did a documentary, it doesn't really make sense to send the film. So whenever I get an email, which is, for instance, not addressed, doesn't mention my company anywhere, I usually don't watch the film because we already get too many. So I just want to see that whenever somebody says like, oh, I saw Sundoc at this festival, saw that you are doing it, and I think my film could maybe also work for your company, I'm immediately already like more interested to watch that film because I actually feel that the person has a bit more ID. of my company. But as I said before, you don't need a distributor. You can do it yourself. I think the most important thing with if you start your festival strategy is just not to give up too soon. The most difficult part is that you will get a lot of rejections. Even our most successful films still at least get like half of all submissions are rejections. And then I'm talking about our most successful film. Most of them get like 1 in 5 submissions is a selection, and that's then a successful film. So you have to be aware that you will get rejections before you get selections. So try to make, for instance, at least a plan of like 30 submissions and stick to that. And then after that, maybe see like, okay, we still don't have any selections. Should I adjust my strategy? Should I do something different? And then finding those festivals, that's maybe also a tricky thing. I would always say just try to copy a different film. So you made a film which is a human rights documentary, 15 minutes in length. Just look at like, okay, what played in festivals in the past year and where did it play? So for instance, you have like this type of topical documentary. Then for instance, you maybe have My Uncle Tudor, who won in Berlinale this year, which might not be related to your theme, but is still a somewhat more classical documentary. And then just see where did this film play, and then I'll start sending it to those festivals as well. So in this way, you can easily get a list of like 30 to 50 festivals, and you already know that you're in some way on the right path with them because they have played similar films before. So I think with this, you can already start out building your festival plan, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Like that's kind of part of the deal. And then with your second film, you can not repeat that. But you can't really make like big mistakes. I think if you have a good film, it will travel to festivals as long as you kind of put in the work. Yeah.
Okay, so for me, it's quite interesting. I think it's very important to know that what you just said, you don't have to be scouted. You don't have to get scouted. So your film doesn't in the first place have to be shown at a festival and wait for the distribution to come to you. It's way more of an active act by your own to just write to the distributions that you feel or think or might know that they could be the one having a place in their catalog because of certain styles or topics that they represent.
I mean, it does work both ways. So I do look at films in the major festivals if they don't have distribution to watch them. Also just to see the films, but this is how I'm actively scouting. So for instance, Motorcyclist Happiness Won't Fit Into a Suit and 1001 Attempts to Be an Ocean are both films that I picked up from Berlinale Shorts this year. But then Yuyan, the director of 1000 Attempts, I already knew from teaching at Frénois, where I saw her first year film, which I also really liked. So we were already in touch. So like I'm actively scouting at festivals. I'm meeting filmmakers of whom I like the film, even though I'm not working with their film, just to kind of keep in touch if they have something new coming up. But I'm also just always watching films. So for instance, last year, the film that I worked with, I'm Afraid to Forget Your Face from Sami Ala, which won the Palme d'Or that year in Cannes. That was a film that just got sent to me. I didn't know the director. I watched it. I thought like, okay, this is a film that has a big chance of going to Cannes. And then we just started working, and then it ended up also going to Cannes. But that's really somebody that just sent their film to me without an introduction. I didn't know the director, and I fell in love with the film. So it can happen kind of in all these different ways. Yeah.
The other thing you said is to copy a certain style as long as you haven't developed your own handwriting in filmmaking, maybe.
Did I say this?
Yes, or did I get that wrong, Samira?
I
Kindly.
I think what I meant is that for the festival strategy, that you can copy like what they did with. I would never say copy somebody's style, because I think you just have to make the film that you want to make. But if you then know that there's a similar type of film, you can do for the afterlife, so for the distribution process, you can kind of copy that, because you do see that certain festivals gravitate to certain films. So in that way, that can help. But I mean, like, I don't like it that much to give people too much direction on their films. Like, if somebody makes a 25-minute film, I know that a 15-minute film will be more successful just because it's shorter and easier to program. But you have to make a film that you want to make. So if that's a 25-minute film, then that's a 25-minute film, and I have to see if I can work with it. So I would always, like, when I hear filmmakers sometimes say like that people make festival films, I don't really believe that. Like, then everybody would have a film in Cannes. So just make the film that you want to make. And probably throughout the year, traveling to festivals, seeing loads of film can give you inspiration to make a different type of film. But I think it's important to really develop your own handwriting.
I also didn't see that, or I didn't understand it as a bad statement. I thought it was quite interesting to say, okay, if you're still developing your style, everybody gets inspiration of people who made films before themselves and everything. So for me, it was just quite interesting, because you know that certain generations bring a certain style into filmmaking. So it was quite fitting to that filmmaking and certain narratives or certain aesthetics have like their terms and their turns.
And I also think that like, for instance, what I saw in the Netherlands is that people are kind of in this closed box, and you're just inspired by other Dutch short films, and I don't think that the best short films, like, I see them more outside of the Netherlands in some cases. So I think as soon as you get the chance to travel, besides that you're able to meet the industry and blah, 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 it's just good to see like loads of films and really take home that inspiration, as you said before, that you actually see like, oh, you can take these types of risks in a narrative. And apparently this works internationally in the market. It doesn't have to be a television-oriented narrative.
So just one information for you. I guess you will have a lot to watch out for at our festival, as we have 5 programs of Hessian talents at Castledockfest. So maybe you will find something there to fit your catalog. Besides from that, I have to say, to like come to an end with that very interesting interview, Square Eyes has several films in the regular program of Castledockfest this year. Let me get that straight. It's Motorcyclist's Happiness Won't Fit into His Suit by Gabriel Herrera. It's Lemongrass Girl from Punzervicha. It's Vaux by Nicolas Gourand. Is that spelled
Google.
correctly? Yeah. The End of Suffering, a Proposal by Jacqueline Letzou. Naya, Der Wald hat 1000 Augen by Sebastian Mulder. And as a feature film, of course, Feast by Tim Lanedecker. And these films you can see throughout the program. Of course, the feature film is standing by itself. The other films are to be found in several short film programs, which can be looked for in our online catalog or also in the catalog, in the printed catalog. Besides from that, we have the Square Eyes distribution screening on site and online. And within this program, there will be found the films Swatted by Ismail Geoffroy Chantoudi, 1000 Attempts to Be an Ocean by Yu Yan Bang. Again, Motorcyclist's Happiness Won't Fit in His Suit by Gabriel Herrera. Lembri Udu by Eva Megi, and Sandog by Dorian Jespers. For me, it's now the time to say thank you, Wouter, for having that interview with me. And I'm looking forward to see you at the festival.
Yes.
And for the viewers outside, Distribution and Profile, Square Eyes, Stop Dreaming and Get In will be screened on Friday, November 19 at 3:30 p.m. On site in the Cinema Festival, and can be found as a DocFest stream for 6 days, starting after the date of, so at the date of the cinema presentation, but after the cinema presentation.